Welcome everyone to this being the fourth in a series of webinars we're conducting on the draft Willoughby Local Environmental Plan and draft Development Control Plan that are currently on exhibition. My name is Ian Arnott. I'm the Planning Manager here at Council, and I'll be presenting along with David Morrissey and Ian Shillington, who I'll introduce as they come on. Tonight we're focusing on Castle Crag, Middle Cove and Castle Cove. Although there will be some slides that are consistent with other seminars that we've already conducted. Firstly, on behalf of Willoughby City Council, I wish to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of the land on which we stand, the Aboriginal people, their spirits and ancestors. We acknowledge the vital contribution that Indigenous people and cultures have made and still make to the nation that we share, Australia. I'm now just going to ask if you would watch a short video as an introduction to our exhibition presented by Mayor Tanya Taylor and Dr. Deborah Deering, the North District Commissioner for the Greater Sydney Commission, or now called the Greater Cities Commission, I believe.
Willoughby is a wonderful place to live. It is a city of diversity with beautiful landscapes, people, and of course our vibrant CBD.
Willoughby is a very diverse place. It has an important centre at Chatswood. It has some really much loved and very successful local centres.
Our residents really value our beautiful bushlands and of course our urban environment and our CBD.
It has a range of housing, quite a number of apartments and also a lot of lower density areas. It has important heritage precincts.
Willoughby City Council is committed to delivering a city that is green, livable, inclusive, connected, prosperous and vibrant. Over the last 5 years, we've engaged with the community to help us develop the Local Environment Plan.
The Local Environment Plan, commonly called the LEP, is the planning instrument which actually sets the framework for future development.
In 2012, we created the Local Environment Plan to help us plan and decide what is built and where in Willoughby.
That's been proposed for change, significant changes. For example, in Chatswood, it is an important commercial place for the whole of the district, and even within Sydney, it has a key role. We want to make sure that's facilitated and expanded into the future. But it's hoped and anticipated that Chatswood will grow to be an even more important commercial centre than it isn't at this point in time. You will see in the LEP some major changes to the heights for commercial buildings and also the introduction of more apartment buildings close to the services around the Chatswood CBD.
It also covers affordable housing, environmental issues and bushfire hazards. The Local Environment Plan outlines subdivision sizes, heights of buildings and the amount of floor space area on which you can build. The plan allocates land for specific purposes through zoning and sets standards for development. It aims to provide jobs and housing growth, more medium and high density living, as well as strengthening the character of our CBD. It will help us design our homes for the future. It helps us guide conservation of cultural heritage as well as protect environmentally sensitive land. It helps us create a better place to live with more trees and connected pathways and cycleways.
We also want to link one green space to the other green space so that it's not just isolated green spaces and recreation opportunities, but they can be a network where they can be readily reached by foot, not needing to take a car. They're opportunities that we need to try to grow into the future. While COVID has thrown up some uncertainty about the pace of change, we do know that cities do grow. Willoughby is a very desirable place in the Greater Sydney area. Sydney is a very desirable city. It will grow into the future.
The plan helps us to set our strategic vision for the future.
Being prepared is important and planning ahead is crucial.
So that's a good introduction to the importance of our centre and our local government area and the planning for the future for it. As I said, I'll be presenting tonight. Ian Arnett is my name. We'll also be hearing from David Morrissey from the Northern Sydney Local Health District and from Ian Shillington, one of our strategic planners. Firstly, I'd like to welcome the Mayor, Tanya Taylor, who's listening online to tonight's presentation, as well as Councillor Campbell and any other councillors that may be in attendance. And to advise that we've received apologies from Councillor John Moratelli and Councillor Hugh Erickson, who couldn't make it tonight. We also have in the order of 150 registered for the webinar tonight online and 14 registered in person. I think we've got about 7 or 8 here. So thank you for taking the time out to come in tonight. It's a hybrid approach to our presentation, which is something that we've done a couple of times already, and as I think we're refining the process a little bit, I hope so. There's an opportunity if you're watching online to submit your questions through the Q&A function of the Zoom. And there is also a chat function. We'd ask you if it's questions that you have to use the Q&A function, and if it's just comments you're wanting to make to go through the chat function. We'll be seeking to respond to your questions online. If we can't do it immediately, if there's something that we need to look a bit further into, we'll be responding to all questions within 10 working days, and they'll be posted up on the Have Your Say. And we will have time at the end of tonight's presentation for questions, both from the floor in the chamber and to try and respond verbally to some of the questions provided online. If you are joining us online, I ask that you switch off your cameras and microphones just to reduce the background noise and to allow the access to get through as easily as possible. The webinar will be recorded, so anything said will be available for public broadcast and archive. So it's important that anyone in the chamber is aware of that their voices will be recorded. And the webinar will be posted online tomorrow. So just running through what we're covering, I'm going to just give a little on the strategic planning background that's arrived at the draft instruments that we have on exhibition, and also just touch on some state government changes that have come about in respect to changing of names of zonings. Then we'll hear from David in respect to creating healthy built environments and how that applies to the work we're doing here in Willoughby. Ian Shillington will then join us to talk specifically about the local environmental plan, which I may refer to as LEP, and DCP, Development Control Plan changes that we have specifically for the Castle Crag Local Centre, that being an area that's gone through quite a degree of consultation through the local centre's strategy, and is now culminating through, or not culminating, is now progressing to the draft local environmental plan and development control plan. And then I'll just talk about the other changes, primarily in respect to housing and residential, that the local environmental plan and development control plan are bringing in. Then, as I said, time for questions and next steps. So just in terms of the local environmental plan, the headline changes are about growing Chatswood. We are identified as providing housing and jobs by the state government, directed to provide them, and Chatswood is the area that we see as capable of most growth, being the most accessible. We're also looking at increasing densities in our local centres, in the 8 local centres that we have had on exhibition through the local centres strategy, and we'll talk a bit more about that in respect to the Castle Crag. For our industrial zones, we're looking at some increases in height and density for those areas to provide for new employment opportunities and industrial opportunities in those areas. We're also introducing design excellence requirements. We're looking at changing our affordable housing provision to increase it from 4% to 10% and to manage urban heat impacts. In respect to our low density controls, we're looking to align with the state environmental planning policy exempt and complying development codes. And we're also looking to transfer our landscape controls that are currently in our DCP into our LEP. So the DCP, or the Development Control Plan, we're looking at reformatting it to make it a more user-friendly document, strengthening our heritage controls, and also looking at the parking requirements with a reduction around railway precincts consistent with our integrated transport strategy. This exhibition is on for a 12-week consultation period through to the 7th of June, and we would really encourage you to make submissions. This is your opportunity to have your say in respect to the changes that are coming about and whether you think we've got it right or not for your area. So just a brief outline of the process of a new local environmental plan and what we've been through already. So we have done in the order of 5 to 6 years of strategic studies and plans for our area. The housing strategy, local centres strategy, industrial land strategy, affordable housing, integrated transport, the Chatswood CBD strategy. The state government has also, for the St Leonard's Crow's Nest area, produced a plan for that area for 2036, looking forward. We have our local strategic planning statement that was adopted by Council in February 2020 and endorsed by the state government. And from all of that strategic work, we've put together the controls that we see as appropriate going forward at this point that we're asking you to provide feedback on. That's the draft LEP, often referred to as a planning proposal, which we forwarded to the Willoughby Local Planning Panel for their advice, following which we reported to Council. Council resolved to endorse it for exhibition, so for this stage in the process, which then required us to refer to the Department of Planning for what's called a gateway determination. And they produced certain requirements from that, which we've now satisfied for it to go on exhibition. So it's currently in that red box on exhibition. Legislatively, we're required to exhibit for a minimum of 28 days, but a document of this size and importance we saw as necessary to provide a much longer time. So 3 months or 12 weeks, as I said, through to 7th of June, following which we'll be reporting back to Council with the outcome of that exhibition, the submissions that have been made and what people's opinion, the community's opinions and concerns around what we placed on exhibition. Report back to Council with a recommendation. That may result in it going forward for gazettal as a final document, or it may result in changes to the document that may go through a further round of exhibition. And once we get to a point that the Council resolved to proceed to gazettal, it's then made when it's published on the legislation website and becomes law. So just in terms of our current local environmental plan, 2012, the work commenced on that in 2006. So you can see that any local environmental plan takes time to come into effect. It was exhibited in 2010 and re-exhibited in 2012. So it did go through 2 stages of exhibition as well and came into force in 2013. So it's time for a relook at our controls. And in fact, state government have directed all councils to do exactly that, to review their local environmental plans. Since the 2012 LEP came into existence, there have been 21 separate amendments to it. The Willoughby Local Strategic Planning Statement is based on the North District Plan, or the directions of the North District Plan, and that is produced by the Greater Sydney Commission, requiring all councils to prepare a local strategic planning statement. It sets a 20-year vision with priorities and actions for each LGA. And the draft LEP gives statutory effect to that document. So the LSPS provides a vision for our area, a planning vision, and in that it talks about further strategies to be undertaken or being undertaken at that time. And the LEP provides the statutory controls that actually implement that, the objectives of that document. So there are various covers there of the strategic work that we've done that forms the basis of the draft LEP and DCP. As I mentioned, it includes the local centres strategy, the Chatswood CBD planning and urban design strategy, industrial land strategy, housing and transport strategies, as well as the St Leonard's and Crow's Nest plan, which is the state government plan for that part, covering 3 separate council areas. That's where the state government has got involved. And it also assists in responding to the Resilient Willoughby Strategy and Action Plan. I just wanted to, just in terms of that resilient plan, it's about creating resilient places and resilient buildings, ensuring that we are addressing the concerns and the real challenge of climate change, that we're providing or addressing the decline in biodiversity and tree canopy, that we're providing more green linkages through our area and opportunities for active transport, walking and cycling, etc. In terms of the buildings, to provide provisions to ensure that our housing addresses our climate and are designed as sustainable and energy and water efficient. So just in respect to the key statistics, we're expected to grow by 14,000 people, the City of Willoughby, to 2036. And so that means we've got to house those people. It's expected that we'll need, and our projections indicate that we'll need an additional 6,700 dwellings to 2036. The state government set us a 5-year target of 1,250 new dwellings by 2021, which we've already achieved. Being a strategic centre, Chatswood being a strategic centre, we are also directed by the state government to provide or address a jobs target, provide the ability for more jobs to be accommodated in Chatswood. And that's in the order of 6,300 to 8,300 new jobs. Just wanted to touch on the state changes to zones that have come about in respect to, and some of these are in name only. So in respect to what has previously been referred to as E-zones, environmental zones, the state government has renamed those as conservation zones. So previously they had an E, and you may be aware in Castle Crag of the large areas, and Middle Cove, Castle Cove as well, of the large areas of E4 land, environmental living. That is now referred to as C4, environmental living. No change to from the state government to those zones other than in name only. That took effect on the 1st of December 2021. They are also bringing about a change to employment zones, being both industrial zones and business zones. So what have previously been referred to as business zones, B zones, are becoming E employment zones, or industrial zones, IN zones, are becoming E zones. With other zones, our B4 zone up until now has been known as B4, is our mixed use zone, and that is becoming an MU1 zone. Those changes haven't taken effect as yet, but are proposed to take effect and are on exhibition in alignment with our draft LEP. So the documents will be available on exhibition, but it's the state government proposals for these changes that you can make submissions to the state government on. Just going to hand over to David Morrissey from the Healthy Built Environments to present on that. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Ian, and good evening, everyone. So, as Ian mentioned, I work for Northern Sydney Local Health District. Northern Sydney Local Health District is part of New South Wales Health, and we cover all areas north of the Harbour Bridge. And one of those LGAs is, of those 9 LGAs, is Willoughby City Council. And so we're very pleased that Ian and the staff here have invited us along to talk to you tonight. You might ask yourself, why is health involved in planning LEPs, DCPs? And hopefully what I say over the next 10 minutes or so will make it clear how integral health is to all of us with our what happens with our zoning. And so tonight we're going to discuss 2 important documents, as Ian mentioned before, LEPs and DCPs, and they will shape Willoughby City Council and influence the lives of everyone who either lives or works in this council area for the next 10, probably 15 years, for quite a while to come. So it's really important that you all have an influence in that, and I thank you for getting involved tonight. So when I talk about the built environment, I'm talking about the human-made spaces we have in our area. We're talking about our houses. We're talking about roads, buildings, footpaths, transport corridors, green open space such as parks, playgrounds and the like. In this short presentation, I'm going to provide you with an overview of the connection between the built environment and our health in order to set the context for tonight's presentation by Council and the discussion also about the draft the LEP and DCP. Before I do that though, I'd like to ask all of you 2 questions. One is, what makes you feel healthy? And if you're online, please just put your answers in the chat function. That's the first one. What makes you feel healthy? And secondly, it relates to that, how does the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your health and well-being, both positively and negatively? And we'll record those and bring them up if we have time. Thanks. Tanya, I think we'll be recording that. So there some of the questions you might like to answer in the chat box. And while you're doing that, I'll elaborate on that a bit. So what makes you feel healthy? Is it the form of physical activity you do? Is it eating healthy food? Is it socialising with family and friends? Is it connecting with nature or spirituality, or a combination of these things? And have a think about those things. And all of those things are related to the built environment. We know that the built environment was not created equal, not all of them. you can look at different parts of the world and have completely different environments from one country or one continent to another. Even within Australia, different cities and suburbs within cities. So the built environment has a profound impact on both our physical and mental health. Healthy built environments support positive health outcomes by making healthy, active lifestyle choices easier. And I'll repeat that because that's the crucial thing I want to say. Healthy built environments support positive health outcomes by making healthy, active lifestyle choices easier. An excellent resource that summarises the many ways in which the built environment interacts with our health is New South Wales Healthy Built Environment Checklist. You can see that on the presentation there. There are 11 themes in those: healthy eating, physical activity, housing, transport and connectivity, quality employment, community safety and security, open space and natural features, social infrastructure, social cohesion and connectivity, environment and health, and environmental sustainability and climate change. All of those contribute to a healthy built environment, and the LEP and DCP will be focusing on those things. So sometimes you might think of livability, and that's what encompasses those 11 themes from the checklist. So healthy neighbourhood design is crucial. Healthy neighbourhood design is facilitated by land use and development decisions, which is guided by documents like the LEP and DCP, which prioritise complete, compact and control plans. And connected communities, complete, compact and connected communities. So they facilitate planned and incidental social interaction. They give people the opportunity to meet at easily accessible destinations like local shops and centres, as you can see in that slide. And they allow people to connect. And when I think where I live, one of the joys I get is walking from home to the local shopping centre, and people I might run into on the way there. And that is all about connecting with the community, with their acquaintances, or it might be just someone out tending their garden. It's one of the things which is great for both our physical and mental health, to connect with the people around us. So these communities support business activity and a strong local economy. They connect people with key services such as public transport when they do need to travel beyond their local neighbourhood for work or pleasure. So if we look at this map here, it's an example of healthy neighbourhood design. We've got a centrally located destinations. We've got primary schools, for example, library, community centres, open space. And around that, you have higher density neighbourhood centres and open space. Within that, you've got retail as well. So people can, as I mentioned before, easily walk from their home to buy their fruit and veg, for example. But you also need the traffic routes, whether it's buses or trains, so people can get into these areas easily without needing to get in their car, which is, of course, cars will include increase pollution and congestion, and we don't want those in our neighbourhood. So this is an example of how zoning and development controls can facilitate complete, compact and connected communities. These controls enable physical activity, opportunities for social connection and access to healthy food at shops within walking distance, which leads to greater physical and mental health. So a central focus of the draft, as it is in this form, LEP and DCP, is housing. From a health perspective, the research evidence is clear that the healthiest neighbourhoods are typically characterised by a diversity of housing types. That's really important, with more compact housing, such as apartments and townhouses located in and near centres. And you can see that examples of that on that slide. So when you think of life from the beginning, when we're born, grow up through living in a family, we might live in a family on, say, a quarter-acre block, which is traditional. And then we move out of home, we might move into an apartment. And then we decide to have a family, and then we want to move back into a quarter-acre block or a separated dwelling. And then that gets all a bit too much for mowing the lawn and doing those things. So we say, well, I'll move out of that and I'll move back into an apartment or a townhouse, something like that. And it's really important that within our communities, we allow for people to move through different stages of their life, to have different styles of accommodation. Some people never want to have a separated dwelling. They want to live in an apartment their whole life, and that's fantastic. So we need to accommodate people depending upon what they want and what stage of life they might want different things. So that's really important. And the LEP and DCP allow for that really well. So I congratulate Council for doing that. So we also need to think of density. Sometimes people get concerned about the word density. Density can concern people because we know that high density, if it's done well with design and it's well located, has an important role to play in accommodating future population growth. We know that housing is a fundamental need of everyone, and it's often talked about in the news about younger people perhaps not being able to afford housing. It tends to be a need, whether it's people to be able to rent or to buy, and that's why social housing is important. So if density is done well, we can have, as per the slide there, we can have green high-rise, and it can be the walls and the like, and lots of green open space around it for the public to use. Through appropriate zoning and best practice development controls, our high density housing is setting a new benchmark for design by incorporating these green roofs and walls, and minimise the potential for negative outcomes such as overshadowing of public spaces. So it's important that our cities become more compact, but we have to invest not only just the quantity, but the quality of our public open space. Access to quality open space within walking distance to where people live and work is associated with a range of positive health outcomes. For example, time spent in green open space reduces the risk of chronic diseases such as heart disease. We also need to consider the final theme of presentation tonight, my presentation tonight, environmental sustainability and climate change. As you can see by the image there, both images there, the major public health benefit we can have through ensuring good tree canopy by reducing heat. They talk about the heat island effects by having too much concrete and not enough green open space and foliage from trees. It's important for our natural habitats as well, and we use shading from building design to cool the environment and future-proof our communities against natural hazards. The design of Willoughby Council's LEP and DCP will influence the tree canopy, and you can have a look and ensure that you're comfortable with those things, as I'm sure you will. Just as far as the input and the influence of heat on our society is demonstrated by a couple of statistics I'll give you. In 2020, more people died from heat than car accidents in Australia. Heat-related deaths in New South Wales account for more deaths than all other natural disasters combined. Heat waves are our most deadly natural hazard. Heat is also killing us slowly through chronic illness. In other words, for example, if we find it too hot to go outside, we won't go out and exercise, whether it's walking, running, or doing anything else. And therefore, that will increase the likelihood of us getting chronic illness, whether it's obesity or like, just from these regular heat events. And so that is an increasing burden on our health system. So these are the things we look at the Healthy Built Environment Checklist, these themes I mentioned before. And so once again, let me ask you, what makes you feel healthy, and consider that when you think of what do you want to see in your neighbourhood over the next 10, 15 to 20 years' time, and consider that when you're considering the LEP and DCP tonight.
Great. Thank you very much for that, David. And certainly the principles that are evoked by the healthy built environments are ones that we've sought to implement through the draft LEP and DCP. Just going to introduce Ian Shillington now. Ian's one of our strategic planners, and I'll ask him to come up to talk to you about the Castle Crag Local Centre and the changes that the LEP and DCP have proposed for that. Thanks, Ian.
Good evening. Thanks, Ian. As Ian mentioned, Ian Shillington's my name. I'm a strategic planner here at Council, and I'm going to take you through what some of the main changes coming out of the draft LEP and DCP as they relate to Castle Crag Town Centre. So, as was mentioned earlier, the local centre strategy that was adopted by Council is the main strategy that influences the proposed changes to the LEP and the DCP that we're proposing. And it's worth just reflecting on that briefly before I move on to the LEP DCP changes. That stated a vision for Castle Crag, being the Castle Crag Local Centre is a thriving historic shopping village in an attractive landscape setting, and offers a range of outdoor spaces for dining and gathering along Edinburgh Road. New development has enhanced the existing scale and pleasant public domain and has reinforced the character of the conservation area and strengthened the Walter Burley Griffin legacy. So in terms of the main recommendations of the strategy that have influenced the LEP, and I'll talk about these in more detail as we work through it. But the main recommendations were to increase heights of up to 4 stories on Eastern Valley Way and up to 3 stories above Edinburgh Road, with an FSR of up to 1.6 to 1 on the quadrangle site. An FSR could be considered of up to 1.8 to 1 with an additional story below the Edinburgh Road frontage to utilise the topography of the site without adversely impacting the streetscape and scale of the centre. Another important recommendation was to retain existing controls for the existing Griffin Centre and identify it as a local heritage item in the LEP. Retain heights of up to 3 stories with an FSR of 1.6 to 1 in the commercial zone, B1 zone, north of Edinburgh Road, with no additional height proposed there. Retain the B1 zoning for the postern with a height limit of up to 3 stories with an FSR of 1.1 to 1. Retain the R3 medium density zone and FSR of 0.7 to 1 for the properties in Edinburgh Road, numbers 95 to 103, and allow for amalgamation into 2 developed lots. And finally, to rezone the council-owned car park adjacent to the Griffin Centre to RE public open space. So in summary, the proposed changes to the local centre strategy were to retain the existing B1 neighbourhood centre zone and the existing R3 medium density zone. Introduce an active ground floor frontage control in the B1 zone to ensure continuing vitality and commercial uses on the ground floor. Concentrate increased height to the south of Edinburgh Road to minimise solar access and amenity impacts, and to change the minimum lot size for the R3 zone properties at Edinburgh Road, they're 95 to 103, from 2,500 to 1,100 square metres. This amendment's consistent with the ministerial direction 3.1 residential zones, and that it encourages a greater variety of and choice of housing types. So this slide shows the proposed changes on the ground in Castle Crag. Some of the things I've already mentioned for 73 to 91 Edinburgh Road on the northern side to increase the FSR, and 100 Edinburgh Road, the quadrangle site, to change the height of building from 9 metres to 11 metres, and allow height of building south of the dotted line to 14 metres where the land drops away, with the FSR being increased from 1 to 1 to 1.6 to 1. The car park on the roadway corner of Edinburgh Road and the postern to change the zoning from unzoned, currently unzoned, to RE1 to facilitate the development of a park there. And 120 Edinburgh Road becoming a heritage item. And for the postern to change the height of building from 9 metres to 11 metres and change the FSR from 1 to 1 to 1.1 to 1. I'll just mention briefly that currently council is considering, or council has recently considered, a planning proposal, which is a rezoning for the quadrangle site, which is 100 Edinburgh Road. So this draft planning proposal was endorsed by council in November 2021 to go to public exhibition. So the proposal will be placed on exhibition after the gateway determination has been received by the state government from the Department of Planning and Environment. So we're currently waiting on that. So this is a separate process to the existing LEP, but it's obviously a key site in Castle Crag. So the proposal was supported by council as considered to be consistent with the local centre strategy and the draft LEP that's currently on exhibition in relation to height and FSR. So the height of building for the proposal is 3 stories on Edinburgh Road and 4 stories below Edinburgh Road. The floor space ratio of any building on the land at 100 Edinburgh Road is proposed to not exceed 1.8 to 1, of which not more than 1.6 to 1 should be above the level of Edinburgh Road. So the concept plan shows uses at the ground level facing Edinburgh Road for commercial purposes and residential apartments located above and at the rear on the ground floor. A minimum of 20% of the total floor space ratio is proposed for non-residential purposes. The concept plan provides for 1,150 square metres of public accessible open space, including a link from Edinburgh Road to the postern at the rear. And that illustration is of the concept plan that was submitted with the draft planning proposal that was considered recently by council. And we're hoping that will be on exhibition in the not too distant future. So back to the draft LEP on exhibition. Some of the other changes include removing anomalies, a new design excellence clause, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute, a new urban heat clause, removal of obsolete clauses such as site-specific where development has been already completed, and update of state and local land acquisitions, for example, road widening and open space. Here's an example of an anomaly which is being proposed to be corrected in the new LEP, which is at 233A Edinburgh Road. So the LEP map boundaries to be amended. The heritage item, item 125, the description in Schedule 5 is not correct and the map should be extended further south to reflect the property which expands over 2 lots. Descriptions should mention 233 and 233A. So it's things like that that we're correcting. The design excellence clause, as I mentioned, applies to specific sites, particularly centres, Chatswood, St Leonard's, and the local centres that were identified in the local centres strategy. So that includes Castle Crag. So above 35 metres in height, proposals would be subject to an architectural design competition. Above 12 metres and not above 35 metres, subject to a design excellence review panel, would be considered as part of the DA process. I've just got a couple more. In terms of housing and what that means, particularly for Castle Crag, the housing strategy that been referred to earlier has key focus areas for new housing in Willoughby, mainly being Chatswood CBD, in mixed use developments as endorsed in that strategy, and in local centres as identified in the local centres strategy, including Castle Crag, where a potential of up to 74 new dwellings were potentially identified as possible at that centre. And also within existing R3 and R4 zones. So the aim being to protect existing R3 low density residential zones and C4 environmental living zones in the interests of maintaining housing choice and diversity. And no changes were proposed to the existing small retail areas in Castle Cove and Middle Cove. So the other, in terms, I'll talk briefly about the DCP as it applies to Castle Crag. So there are specific, in Part L, there are specific guidelines and controls for local centres that reflect the recommendations of the local centre strategy. And these include Castle Crag. It's intended that the relevant performance criteria and controls under general parts B and D of the DCP relating to residential and commercial development will also apply to the place management plans in Part L. However, if there's any inconsistencies with the controls under parts B and D, the controls under Part L will prevail. So I'll just talk about Part L as it applies to Castle Crag. I might just move to the master plan. So I don't know if you can read all the numbers up there, but I'll just briefly talk you through the master plan that's in the DCP and some of the elements there. Some of the things I've already mentioned, the retention of the Griffin Centre and the ground floor facade, roofline and active street frontage, provide a new, provide a new car park and green space there in front of the Griffin Centre, extend the curved facade of the Griffin Centre to reinforce the postern, provide pedestrian links through the quadrangle site to the postern, retain mature boundary trees. For any new development of the quadrangle site, include a park plaza with good solar access. Provide rooftop gardens and communal open space for any shop top housing. That's both on the northern and the southern side of Edinburgh Road. Retain at grade car parking area. That's that area at the entrance to Castle Crag. Provide curb blisters to improve mid-block crossing amenity. Provide threshold and for new developments, provide open space between shop top housing. Provide a new vehicle access to the quadrangle basement off Edinburgh Road there, number 13. 14, provide a new left out vehicle access from the quadrangle onto Eastern Valley Way. And 15, create a green entry point at the intersection of Eastern Valley Way and Edinburgh Road. Finally, I'll talk about some of the controls that are proposed in the DCP as they relate to Castle Craig. Again, I think it's probably better if I put up the diagram and I'll just talk to those. So in terms of the southern side of ensure a maximum of 4 stories above the level at Eastern Valley Way frontage and up to 3 stories along Edinburgh Road, that's on the southern side, including the quadrangle site, which I've talked about. Retain the Griffin Centre, which is identified as a heritage item. Ensure a maximum of 3 stories and a 6-metre setback above the second level on the northern side of Edinburgh Road. Ensure a maximum of 3 stories for the postern. Require amalgamation for 2 development sites at 95 to 103 Edinburgh Road, a minimum of 1,100 square metres with vehicle access from the rear lane or side street. Create a public open space on the council-owned car park. Number 6. Number 7, provide a minimum 3-metre upper level setback, second story for shop top housing. Number 8, maintain direct pedestrian links from the quadrangle site to the postern. Number 9, ensure the built form does not restrict solar access along the footpath and adjoining public open space on the southern side of Edinburgh Road from 9 AM to 3 PM on the 21st of June. So the building heights and the setbacks on the northern side are important in that control there for sunlight access. Retain the mature trees at the front and the rear of the quadrangle site. Number 11, provide a green landscaped entry point to Castle Craig. And finally, 12, provide a rooftop garden over the development with car parking area below. So now I'll pass you back to Ian to talk through the housing controls.
Thanks very much, Ian. And for those that have been involved in the development of the local centre strategy for Castle Craig, you can see that this is very much built on what was the adopted strategy for that, and is really the means of implementing what came through as that strategy at the end. I'm now focusing on housing and what the LEP and DCP is seeking to change really in respect to our housing controls. One of the more significant changes is for our low density zone, R2 zone, to align the controls in both the LEP and DCP with the state policy for complying development. This is primarily seen as providing equity, where someone can do a complying development dwelling on one site by simply complying with a range of controls specified in the state policy. And yet on the next door site, if they want to do something that slightly is non-compliant and needing to go through the development application process, it was seen as unreasonable to impose far more restrictive standards on those, and rather to provide that equity of controls. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. However, one of the controls that Council wasn't prepared to align with the code SEP was the landscaping control. We see the importance of landscaping in our area, both in the sense of that healthy environment that David was speaking about, but also in the sense of the character of our Willoughby local government area. And this presentation tonight focusing on the peninsular suburbs, particularly of those areas, the garden character, the landscape character of the suburbs that we have, of our low density areas. So we have determined, for the purpose of this exhibition, to relocate the landscaping controls from our development control plan to the local environmental plan, giving them greater strength, greater weight in when they're challenged, and being able to enforce them with greater strength. We're also looking to amend our dual occupancy provisions to similarly align with the code SEP, and I'll talk some more about that as well. The code SEP brought in low-rise, medium-density housing provision that relates to manor houses and allows, without reference to council, through complying development, through a private certifier, the ability to build 4 dwellings on a 600 square metre site in any zone that allows for residential flat development. We thought that was not an efficient way of utilising that land and achieving the dwelling targets that we have set, and so have increased that provision to a minimum of 1,100 square metres, which is consistent with what we already have for residential flat development. And also, as I mentioned earlier, changes to our affordable housing provision. So just to give a couple of examples here of dwellings that have been approved in the Willoughby LGA under complying development on the left-hand side, and under development applications on the right-hand side. And you can see that, at least from a streetscape point of view, the scale and bulk of those developments is not significantly different. This is a bit of a complex table, or 2 tables, but I just want to refer you firstly to the left-hand table, which is the current controls for floor space under the current Local Environmental Plan 2012. If you look down to the line 301 to 400 being the site area and go across, you can see that for a 400 square metre site area, in terms of gross floor area, a maximum of 200 square metres is achievable on that site. Yet if you go to the next line down, 401 square metres site area, you drop back in the amount of floor space you can achieve to 188.5. That's come about because of the floor space ratio control applied, rather than a continuum of gross floor area control that has been applied under the code SEP. That's one of the reasons that that we've sought to align with the code SEP, that it does provide that equity in terms of a continuum based on an increased site area, provides an increased floor space opportunity. And that can be seen from the table on the right-hand side, which is the proposed floor space controls under the new LEP. I just point out that this isn't something that is proposed to apply to the environmental living zones, which Castlecrag has a large expanse of, or the conservation areas. It's only to those areas that complying development, a new dwelling house by complying development can currently be applied for and approved. I won't dwell on each of these examples. These slides will be available on our website and you can make reference, but that's just an example of how the controls apply. I just want to talk about the landscaping control because it is the one control that we are not proposing to adopt from the code SEP. You can see in the left-hand table what is our current development control plan control. And if you compare that, the right-hand column of the left-hand table to the right-hand column of the right-hand table, you can see that, that in all instances, our control provides or requires a greater component of natural landscaped area. So we're proposing to retain that same control, however, to move it into the local environmental plan to give it that greater strength, as I mentioned. So I will run through this example, which covers both the landscaping and the floor area controls. This is for a site of 650 square metres. Under our local environmental plan, it would have enabled a floor space of 279 square metres. Under the housing code or the complying development code, a floor space of 335 square metres. So quite a significant increase in floor space achievable. And that is what we're proposing under the draft LEP as well. In this instance, it was approved at 312 square metres. Landscaping, however, under our controls, our existing development control plan and our proposed draft LEP would require 266 square metres. Under the complying development code, 195 square metres is all that's required. And in this instance, 255 was provided. There has been some testing that we've undertaken as to whether the floor space and the landscaping controls can be applied to sites successfully. And we found that it can be. It does, of course, result in a greater amount of floor space at an upper level. And that floor space would still be subject to the same standards required for a complying development, which are the setback controls, the stepping in at upper levels, etc. Just moving on. Sorry. That's how we're seeking to align the dwelling house controls with the code step. And we are also seeking to align the dual occupancy controls with the code step as well. Just to run through the types of dual occupancy that you can have, starting from the top left-hand corner, that's referred to as an attached side-by-side dual occupancy, 2 dwellings attached that both have street frontage. The top right-hand is attached one above the other. The bottom left-hand is detached, both with a street frontage, in this instance being on a corner site. And the bottom right-hand detached in a battle axe formation. Under the code step, the first 3 forms are able to be approved as complying development, but not the battle axe formation. You can see from the from this example, and you may know from your own experience perhaps, that where a second dwelling is placed in the rear yard, it can have some significant impacts. Firstly, it impacts the ability to, the backyard character of our areas. It places dwellings into that backyard zone, and which can be more intrusive on the neighbours. It can cause overshadowing, privacy, and just bulk impacts when viewed from neighbouring properties. It also reduces that opportunity for landscaped area and canopy tree planting. So we have in the draft LEP, again, aligned with the code step by not allowing dual occupancy in that battle axe formation. So just running through the application to dual occupancy in the draft local environmental plan results in the floor space formulas that are expressed there, consistent with the code step. However, the landscape control, we've sought to align with what we require of a dwelling house, the dwelling house control. So we see that these dual occupancies are going on the same sites that you could have a dwelling house. So we see the same importance placed on having that garden character and the natural landscaped area. So we're applying the same natural landscaped area controls. The other change for dual occupancy is that under the code SEP, you can subdivide a dual occupancy immediately. Under our current LEP, that's not permitted until 5 years after the dual occupancy is completed. And we're looking again to align with that. Just running through an example. This is a dual occupancy that's an attached side by side with a site area of 730. We don't propose to change our site area provisions relating to dual occupancy, being 700 for attached and 900 for detached. In this instance, our current local environmental plan allowed floor space of 292 square metres, and it was approved right at that figure. Under the code SEP and under our draft LEP, 482 square metres. So a significant increase in floor space would be achievable and is achievable, in fact, under the code SEP already. Someone could come and do a code SEP development for dual occupancy today that without any merit assessment, but purely a ticker box, if they satisfied all the standards in the code SEP, could do a dual occupancy at 482 square metres. So we're seeking to align with that so that if a dual occupancy that might have a minor non-compliance with the code SEP, so couldn't be approved through that means, could submit a development application and would be generally assessed against those same controls. However, not the landscaping control. In the landscaping, our current DCP for dual occupancy is 35% of site area and would require, in this instance, 255.7 square metres. 311 was provided. Under the code SEP, that's slightly more than our current DCP, 265 square metres. However, significantly less than we're proposing under the draft LEP of 308, being consistent with the dwelling house provision. That's another example, which I won't run through. It's just another example indicating the same application of the controls, which will be available on our website if you wanted to check through it tomorrow. Just in terms of manor houses, as I mentioned, the code SEP allows for that manor house form of development for up to 4 dwellings on the one site. For a minimum site area of 600 square metres in a zone that allows for residential flat development. We're proposing to increase that to 1,100 square metres, consistent with what we require for residential flat buildings. And just regarding affordable housing, in residential flat development or in shop top housing development, we currently require a 4% affordable housing provision dedicated to council for affordable housing use. That's in addition to the permissible floor space on that site. So, for example, if you're permitted a 1.5 to 1 floor space ratio, the amount of floor space provided would be 1.5 to 1 plus that 4% affordable housing. Under our local strategic planning statement, there was a commitment to increase that to 7% by 2021 and 10% by 2026. To get such provision through a local environmental plan is a long process, and we've obviously passed the 2021 timeframe, and we're jumping straight to the 10% in the current draft LEP. That would be 10% of the floor space within that permissible floor space. So it's not in addition to, but it's within the permissible floor space. There's a feasibility report that was undertaken by SGS Planning and Economics on behalf of Council that will also be available for consideration in conjunction with the exhibition, that will help to inform whether you think that 10% is reasonable or not. Just want to quickly go through the different, an overview of the draft DCP changes. So the draft DCP has been changed to hopefully make it a more user-friendly document. It's a very big document. It will continue to be big. It's the supporting document for the local environmental plan and contains a lot of additional provisions in it. It's divided. The new one is seeking to make it a more user-friendly document. It's divided into 12 different parts. And is seeking to make it more development-based. So if you're doing a residential development, you primarily have to only go to one section of the document to get all of the residential requirements and the things that come off that. That's not entirely true. You still will have to go to some other sections. Part B is the residential development section of the DCP, and it divides it into minor and major development. Minor being the low density, dwelling houses, dual occupancy, secondary dwellings, those things. Major development being residential flat development, shop top housing development, and so on. So as I've said, the R2 zone seeking to align with the complying development step with the exception of landscaping. The C4 zone, previously the E4 zone, the environmental living zone, is the standards remain the same. However, the landscape control also going into the LEP, and additional documentation being sought in respect to sites that are adjacent, development occurring adjacent to bushland areas or where places of potential Aboriginal significance are. In respect to the heritage conservation areas, obviously demolition of contributory items in conservation areas is discouraged and always has been discouraged. However, if someone seeks to demolish a contributory item in a conservation area, we're just outlining the sorts of things that they would need to provide council with to justify that position, why they see it as reasonable to demolish this. And it might be things such as structural engineers' reports showing that the building is no longer structurally stable and couldn't be made structurally stable in a reasonable or in a reasonable manner. We've also incorporated additional controls relating to semi-detached development, something that was missing from our DCP previously, and reinforcing the importance of protecting the external fabric and streetscape character. Sorry, just going back to the LEP, Ian touched on it before, but I just want to also reiterate that under the LEP, it is also proposed to identify the Griffin Centre as a heritage item, a local heritage item. In respect to shop top housing, the controls largely say the same with the exception of aligning more with the Apartment Design Guide, a state government produced document. Where there are inconsistencies, the existing controls would continue to apply. And also there are additional provisions relating to deep soil areas within a site. So this is just to say where to reference in terms of the DCP, the primary part for residential development being part B, primary part for commercial being part C, and part L for the local centre, the Castle Crag local centre, for those additional specific controls. But where there's inconsistency, referring back, the part L would take precedence, but otherwise refer back. Then other parts of the development control plan that you may need to reference for residential or other types of development, transport and parking management, where we're looking to align with our integrated transport strategy and have travel demand management application, vegetation management, which had changes brought into effect in 2020 and has minimal further change. Water management, again, minor changes just to clarify aspects of that part, but that was fairly recent as well, coming into effect in 2019. And building sustainability, which again came into effect in 2020 with no further changes proposed, or sorry, were updated in those years. So I'm handing it over to the floor and also online to questions that you may have. And I'll ask Ian to come up and join me. So is there anyone within the chamber? Yeah. I think there will be a microphone coming round.
Microphone so that the people online can hear you.
I wonder how these changes interact with the Livability preservation controls down the further length of the peninsula of Castle Crag. Where do these controls stop and start?
So the local environmental plan and development control plan apply to, or these draft instruments apply to the whole of our local government area. So we'll continue to apply for the full peninsular area. In terms of the conservation area, the heritage conservation area and the heritage items within Castle Crag, there's no change proposed to the controls applying to those, other than, and much of that is within that environmental living zone, now referred to as the C4 zone. So other than the change to incorporate the landscape control into the local environmental plan rather than in the development control plan.
One other question. These changes seem to me to allow for a greater density. How much you characterise that density? Another 10% more dense or less dense potentially?
Are you referring to the low density zones that I was making reference to, or to the local centre that Ian was referring to?
Well, in fact, both in general terms. I mean, to what extent might there be further traffic consequences, for example, if there is this easing of density requirements?
So as I touched on earlier, council has been, well, the city is growing. We are in a growing city, and a sustainable approach to accommodating people is to provide additional dwellings around transport nodes and services. And the bulk of our housing, increased housing provision, is intended, or is the planned for around the Chatswood CBD, being the most accessible in terms of having the rail line, the metro line, good access, a bus centre terminus, providing good access. And so that is the logical location to provide increased density, with the intention that people use public transport, can walk to the shops rather than get in their car, so to reduce car usage. Similarly, the local centre, which, as was mentioned, is the second focus area for providing increased provision of housing. The local centre also has services at hand in terms of the local shops, etc., and is on transport routes, buses, etc. In terms of increased densities in terms of house size, that is already permissible under the code set. So what we're saying is, yes, they are bigger dwellings, will potentially accommodate more people. There is dual occupancy that can already occur without reference to council through the state government provisions that allow it to be approved by private certification. So it potentially will increase the densities to some extent. What we are seeking to do is also through green networks, etc., improve connectivity, improve the desirability of active transport, as David previously was talking about the importance of. So improving the ability for walking and cycling and accessing local services and other public transport as well. But people like to use their cars. The principle of locating people close to transport and services is the underlying principle seeking to be applied.
I noticed in the WLEP that there was very clear in the aims about the canopy, the greening, the heat, etc. And this plan is proposed to come in soon. And in our suburb in Middle Cove, there's now a plan or started to rip up the footpath, which is a green footpath, and replace it with a concrete, bright white concrete footpath, take out the tree canopy. And I was just wondering how that would go through the council processes and the WLEP, because it seems non-compliant to me.
So under our local strategic planning statement and also under our Green Cities plan, we're seeking to increase tree canopy through to 2036. There was, I don't know, some people might have seen an article in the Sydney Morning Herald a few weeks ago that referred to tree canopy loss, and it talked about Willoughby as having a 41% canopy cover. They're not our figures, actually. We had slightly less. We had that I think it was 2016, so about 36% tree canopy cover. But we do agree with the article in the sense that the article referred to a 3% loss in, and I can't remember the time frame. And we also agree that canopy cover has been reducing, and that's why we've got a target of 40% tree canopy cover by 2036. And to seek to ensure that, that's part of the underlying objective around keeping those garden areas to enable canopy planting, which otherwise would it's much harder to achieve. But we also have the vegetation management section of the DCP and other supporting documents that require, where trees are removed, 3 replacement trees. Now, I know the circumstance you're talking about, although I don't know it in detail, but my understanding is that they would have to provide, and it may not be in that immediate location, but there would be a replacement planting provision for trees that are lost. But I can't talk to the specifics of that.
I think that would be challenging, but
challenging in that specific location, I understand.
Trees and canopy proposed to be taken out to put this very bright white concrete path, because the council's decided to stop the aggregate, the type that blends in with nature, and use the bright white concrete, a cost saving. So it seems big disparity to the published plan to what's happening in our suburb, Middle Cove.
As I understand what you're saying, as I say, I don't know the detail of that, and I understand council, you know, there has been consultation with the community, and that's ongoing, I think. So thank you. I'll just take one from online. Tanya.
Thanks, Ian. This one's from Audrey Thomas. Have the proposed residential FSR changes been tested in terms of resultant built forms for achievable site coverage, landscaping, etc., for various allotment sizes to ensure that the pattern of development is acceptable within the residential environment?
Yes, so as I mentioned, there has been some testing that has taken place to ensure that the floor space and the landscape provision that we're seeking can be achieved. And it is a changing environment in the sense that this scale of development can be done under the compliant development provisions already. So what we're seeking to do is align with those provisions to, if you like, provide that consistency. There has been some level of testing done, Audrey, on that.
Ian, can you explain why we need to increase the floor to space ratio with the complying development? Why do we need to have bigger houses than what we've already got? And also, I know that you can't answer this one, but complying development, if everyone goes up for 2 stories, the shadow diagrams are not required, which I think is a big flaw in the CDC scheme, because if your house is on the south of a northern house and they go up, you've lost your sun, etc., etc. So I don't understand why you need to increase the FSR.
So Ben, it is from that principle of equity that if someone can do something on one site and yet a development just slightly doesn't comply in one respect, they need to go through the development application process and are severely reduced in what they can achieve on that site. We have had various circumstances that are a bit ludicrous, you might say. We've had a situation where a dwelling was approved by complying development with the front door elevated up on a front porch and front door elevated up in the order of 1 metre or 1.5 metres off the ground, but they couldn't put the steps in under the complying development to access that. They had to go round to the back door to get into the house. They got the dwelling approved through complying development and then put in a development application for the stairs. So it really results in a fairly ludicrous situation. And really what we're saying is what we are assessing to a large extent, any development application has to do a comprehensive assessment, but really what it's assessing is the area of non-compliance and what is the impact of that non-compliance with those standards, and is it reasonable or not? Because without that non-compliance, they could do it anyway under complying development.
Okay. Okay, this one's from Tatiana Jurek. Hope I'm saying that correctly. The recent DA for 3 the Poston has not provided for the activity street frontage as adopted in the Castle Crag Local Centre strategy. This should be strengthened in the LEP control for active street frontage.
Thank you. That sounds like a comment, and it's perhaps something that is worth making a submission about in terms of whether the active street frontage controls proposed in the LEP and DCP, in your mind, achieve the objectives that you think should be for the area.
Another one quickly from Tatiana is for an explanation of the new LEP landscaping control. Have we answered that already now?
An explanation?
Yes.
So it really is the existing landscaping control for dwellings and being transferred from the development control plan into the local environmental plan. So it's the same control. However, a local environmental plan is a higher, legally more difficult to vary. A greater level of justification to vary those standards is required. And it is a legally gazetted document, whereas a development control plan has been referred to through the courts as a guideline. So is more difficult, if you like, to enforce and for council to hold applicants or property owners to the standards applied. I hope that probably covers the question. I think we're at 7:30, so I might just move on to the next steps. Thanks. So as I mentioned, the draft LEP and draft development control plan are now on exhibition until the 7th of June, being a total of 12 weeks. We would really encourage you to make submissions to help us, to guide us in what you think is the way forward for these areas. There are further webinars that we're doing for other centres and other areas, and including our industrial areas, if you're interested in those as well. But there is also an additional session for Castle Crag. It'll be repeating generally what we've been saying tonight, and that's on the 12th of April. Feedback you've provided today will be provided in a feedback report. There will be, following the exhibition period, a report back to council in which submissions will be considered and suggested amendments for the plan made or recommended. That may take it to finalisation, or it may result in, as I said before, going back through another round of exhibition, depending on the extent of those changes recommended or resolved by council. When it is arrived at a point that is seen as reasonable for going forward, it will be referred to the Department of Planning and Environment for the new Willoughby Local Environmental Plan to be made, and for council, and council will endorse, with council's endorsement of the new DCP, that would occur at the same time as the LEP, we're coming into force at the same time as the LEP being made. And so we're hopeful that they would be reported up to council following the exhibition later this year, and if no further exhibition is required, made towards the end of this year. So thank you very much for your time this morning, and we look forward to your submissions. Thank you again.
Just before we wrap up, Ian, just a reminder that we'll be sending out all of the questions that we haven't got to tonight, and those that we have, out via email to everybody that registered for this webinar today. And so that'll be in about 10 working days. And some of those questions will also be included on the Have Your Say site that are relevant across the board as far as some of the questions that were asked. So thanks for your time. Bye.